Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to all participants joining us today for my conversation with Bea Nettles on the occasion of her 50-year retrospective exhibition, Bea Nettles, Harvest of Memory. I'm Amy L. Powell. I'm curator of modern and contemporary art at Krannert Art Museum at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I'd like to begin this event with a land acknowledgement statement, which helps ground us, especially now in our Zoom placement. And so I encourage all of you, no matter where you're located, to also know and acknowledge and go beyond to acknowledge Indigenous presence wherever you may be. Krannert Art Museum, as part of the University of Illinois, stands on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These lands were the traditional territory of these indigenous nations prior to their forced removal, and they continue to carry the stories of these nations in their struggles for survival and identity today. As part of a land-grant institution dedicated to promoting the critical power of art of the past and present, Krannert Art Museum has a responsibility to acknowledge the peoples of these lands, as well as the histories of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this university over the last 150 years. We also recognize the particular role images have played in this history. Using our collections, programming, and collaborative relationships, we seek to address and reflect on these histories and the role that the U of I continues to play in shaping them. A few logistics this afternoon. This event is live captioned. You can turn captions on and off via a button at the bottom of your screen. We are recording for the exhibition archive to make sure we have an archive of this moment and this conversation. For the best viewing experience, we recommend gallery view. So at the top right of your screen, if you hover over view, you can select gallery there. And if you like, you can also change the relative size of what you're seeing. So if you want to see more or less of us talking or my shared PowerPoint, there are small gray bars that pop up between the two components and you can slide them one way or the other. We have disabled chat for this conversation, but we have enabled Q&A. So if you'd like to pose a question for Bea or for both of us, we will address questions in the last 15 minutes. So if you think of something during the event and you want to type it in during the event, that's totally fine. We'll turn to those in the last 15 minutes or so. And I'll read through some of them and pose them to Bea. Our purpose today is really Bea's artwork and our conversation together. There are a number of really excellent oral histories with Bea, both published and online in video form. And so I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge her career retrospective here on view at Krannert Art Museum and add to that extant body of history about her work. So we will not get to everything. That's not quite possible in an hour and a half, but we will sort of address some larger themes and move through her work and add to the digital archive of this exhibition and oral histories around her work. Harvest of Memory is organized by the George Eastman Museum and the Sheldon Art Galleries. It is co-curated by Olivia Las Gonzalez and Jamie Allen. I'm grateful to them both. Here at CAM, we are grateful for support from the Roseanne Galvin Noel Fund and the Student Cultural Programming Fee, along with co-sponsorship from the Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Illinois. And they have terrific holdings of Bea's books and her teaching materials right here on campus. And I want to acknowledge here too, all of the incredible work by my colleagues at Krannert Art Museum to realize this exhibition in our renovated East Gallery. Our installation team, our marketing, and my fellow curators and everyone on staff has just been so incredible, especially working now during these challenging times. Bea Nettles has had a long career as an artist and teacher. In 1968, she earned her BFA in her home state at the University of Florida, where she studied with photographers Robert Fichter and Jerry Uelsmann. This genealogy meant that she already had a strong foundation in experimental techniques and in understanding photography as a world-altering medium, not something that's simply taken, but something that is absolutely constructed. She began stitching and hand coloring her work, as well as developing on fabric, when she was a graduate student here at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. She graduated from Illinois in 1970, and that's the same year that photo curator at the Museum of Modern Art, Peter Brunel, visited town, which was quite a scene, I understand. He flew right into town and made selections from Bee's MFA show for his path-breaking exhibition, Photography into Sculpture. And here I'll plug a University of New Mexico curator and scholar, Mary Statzer, who edited a volume and has done a lot of work on that 1970 exhibition. We'll be interviewing Bee. We'll be in conversation with Bee on February 25th at 4 o'clock. So if you'd like to hear from them, those details for that event, February 25th, are also on our exhibition website. From Florida and Illinois, Bee continued to Rochester and Philadelphia, and she eventually made her way back to Urbana in 1984, where she chaired the photography program in the School of Art and Design for some years, eventually retiring from the department in 2008. Her work is held by major museum and library collections throughout the United States and Canada, due in large part to her careful attention to key placements of her work. Bee is an incredible documentarian of her own archive and has been hugely responsible for key purchases, acquisitions, and gifts around Native American or North American collections. Bee Nettles' work has consistently occupied the rich, indeterminate terrain between photography and object and between photography and craft. She has used a wide range of equipment, techniques, materials, and formats: simple homemade pinhole cameras and large format professional ones, fabric, thread, and paint, historic photographic processes combined with printmaking and the artist book and card deck. Nettles' imagery references key stages of a woman's life by incorporating autobiographical and metaphorical elements. Her work examines place, nature, dreams, mythology, and the passage of time. Balancing the responsibilities of work, the demands of parenting, and her drive to create art, Nettles used her personal experiences as subject matter and took advantage of life-changing events as catalysts for experimentation and change in her practice. As such, everyday circumstances gave her the freedom to upend convention and to speak about subjects that were previously taboo, such as motherhood, pregnancy, and menstruation. This text is from the intro to the exhibition by Jamie Allen. So those of you who have seen the show will recognize this text. It is such a joy and a privilege to be immersed in this work. One benefit, I suppose, of the pandemic is that at Krannert Art Museum, we've really increased our digital resources, especially with this exhibition. And there are a number of incredible resources on the exhibition website that I would point you to. One is a Mount Hope Cemetery walking tour with Bee and David Hayes that they took with my colleague Liza Sylvester. So you can actually walk around the cemetery with them if you like, or read along and follow the map. Bee also reconstructed her visual studies workshop lecture from 1974, for which Visual Studies Workshop had the archival audio, and now the slideshow is there as well. In addition to videos of 2 of Bee's books, we'll be seeing a couple of those today. So do check out the exhibition webpage at cam.illinois.edu, and also the George Eastman Museum's exhibition webpage has loads of great resources for this exhibition. So welcome, Bee. Hello.
Hey.
Good to see you. So I thought we'd start way back, because also selfishly because we're here at Illinois, but I'm curious if you could take us back to your education at Florida and here at Illinois. And this question has really fascinated me because in a lot of ways, you know, the photo program here then, and it's reflected in the museum's collection now, is really Chicago Bauhaus formalist. You know, you process a photograph with that clear sky and nothing else in it, you know, really establishing fine art photography. And you already had all kinds of things going on by the time you got here. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. This first image we're looking at isn't even technically a photograph. It's a contact print through a drawing on tracing paper. And so it's a photogram.
Mhm.
And it was not the first assignment I did, but it was very early on. It would have been in the fall of 1967 when I was taking the only photo class that it was a required class from Robert Fichter. It was basic photography. So he started us right off the bat experimenting. So that's what we're seeing in this first image. It wasn't the first assignment, but I think the next two slides are pretty
And
close to being.
this is Florida. for
Yeah,
sure.
this was done in Florida. Yeah. And this is a response to a Florida landscape, the feel I had for what we used to call cow trees, the oak trees on the horizon. And looking at it now, it could also be Chicago skyscrapers, but that's not what it was.
And I love all the texture in the middle band of this image.
That was a rubbing from the back of an oak chair that my grandmother used to sit in at dinner.
Mm.
And it saved me doing a lot of drawing because that was never my strong point.
I was taking rubbings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when I first started coming to your studio at home and looking through a lot of early material, especially, I was really taken with these studies from your undergraduate days. Can you tell us what these are?
Sure. This is what we call down south a winky pin. And it's the lotus pod. It's the center of a lotus flower gone to seed. And I picked basically one and repeated it, used it, the negative from it to double print or triple print or move. I had the negative in the enlarger and I moved the photo paper underneath and made these prints. Okay, we got to go way back, first of all, and realize we didn't have Photoshop.
Mm-hmm.
We barely had color photography back then, okay? So this was, if you wanted an image like this, you had to have other kinds of tricks up your sleeve. And I had learned these sorts of printing techniques from Robert Fichter, who'd also learned some of his from Jerry Uelsmann, who had been his teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was freely incorporating these techniques that I had been shown as an undergraduate student. This was Robert's second assignment to us in basic photo, which was to take an object and use just one object and make as many things as you could think of with it.
Mm-hmm. And this is just two examples. I know there were
Yeah,
many more that
yeah.
you completed. Yeah.
I did a good body of work, got an A on it.
And bringing the winky pins forward.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, the one that's the toned totem, 1968, would have been done the next semester, but the negative in the middle would have been shot that first semester when I went out to the field to a fairly dry lake bed and photographed a whole field of winky pins. This was lotus seeds during the drier season that had dried out, and that's what you see. It looks sort of like grain or corn. It's very prophetic of the landscape that I moved to, which is on the right-hand side. That's the imaginary prairie, which was done in graduate school. So these are two very different responses to a very flat landscape. And my impression when I first came to graduate school here was, wow, it's flat. It's just like Florida. Florida is flat. Florida has a lot more water than we see around here. There are ponds, there's lakes, there's ocean, anything you want. There's always water nearby. But there often is a distant flat horizon. So when I came to grad school, that was one of the first things I noticed. I got here in August probably of 1968, and not too long after that, they started to plow up the cornfields and so forth. And I was also really amazed by the black soil. Soil in Florida, unless you're just in the murky sort of swamp, is not black. And so that was another thing that impressed me a lot. So the imaginary prairie, which you own at the museum now, was made my second semester as a grad student here at the U of I. The print was made as traditional etching. And then when I started to try to find ways to put imagery onto fabric, I thought, well, I could probably print an etching on fabric, and I could. So I was able to get some scale by printing that same print 3 times and sewing it together, quilting it, and making a pretty good sized piece.
That's right. And then adhering netting on top of it. I mean, it's got all kinds of things.
Yeah, the hair nets were from the Salvation Army here in town,
Mhm.
and a certain amount of embroidery happens actually on the cloth, but also in the etching, because etchings, you can use a technique called soft ground, where you can press a texture into the ground that's on the plate and etch it in. So I was using the edges of embroidered pillowcases.
Mhm.
So there's actually hems and seams. When you get to see the show, you can tell that a lot of the texture in this image was made from fabric um, that was pressed in, and the plates were made, and then on top of that I did more stitching.
The exhibition has 3 thematic sections, and here at CAM, the first one that folks will encounter is nature and landscape. And so there's lots of horizon lines throughout your work. But what I love in this example, this pairing, is how the horizon line kind of multiplies. It's both kind of real and references the world, but it's also manipulated, turned, repeated, sewn on,
Mhm.
adjusted. Yeah.
And that little cumulus cloud tries to peek in both pieces, definitely in the photo, a little less so in the etching.
Mhm.
That's a cloud favorite of mine, that formation.
Yeah, I think we'll see some more of
Yeah,
those
you will.
shortly. But I think next up, you have a more recent, um,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. This is real recent. Well, fairly recent. I'm still doing this sort of work. I've been using my cell phone camera exclusively for maybe the last 7 or 8 years when I go into cemeteries to photograph people's last names that are nouns and verbs and adjectives. And so what you're looking at, they look like refrigerator magnets. Those are little pictures of people's last names that I found basically all over the world now in graveyards. And I have great databases and I keep collecting them. I've got almost 7,000 now, and I can't seem to stop. But I write poetry with them, and then I make visual books with the words. Um, so I wanted to read you one because this is really in reference to that Winky Pin Lake and the sort of ponds that you have in Florida. This is from the book called Place. And if you find this intriguing, there's a really good video. It's in 4 parts. You can choose just to read or hear one of the 4 or the whole thing if you want. It's divided American history into 4 regions of the country, the 4 cardinal directions, and this comes from the South. So this is how it sounds also when it's read out loud. And again, these are all of them are last names. I have certain rules. I don't cheat. I don't edit the words out. I might take some bird mess off and clean up the stone so it's readable, but I don't change the spelling. Okay, so here we go. Jaybird bickers, spring messenger pipes bing, ping, bing, cronk, ronk, cronk. Bass bull bellows, aha, aha. Sinkhole teams, crane spears claypool meals. Barefoot boys wade during wavering shade. Palm green shields furnish cloud cover. Hammock tester down sweet teas, her bold cousins swim over sand rock bottoms. Rain sprinkle ferns. Sunshine stays bright during summer storm. Lavender flowers cover lake. Hawk hooks millwater snake. Ivy vines twist, twine. Blue heron waits over water's edge. Fine roots finger dark cave chambers. And these themes come up in my work. You're going to see a lot of underwater viewing. And so these are the fine roots that finger the dark cave chambers. I've never done any diving in caves, but I've swum around them some.
Yeah, I love the sounds and alliteration,
Mhm.
bing, ping, bing, the sounds of the
Yeah, we had names for all the frogs down there as kids.
right.
Yeah,
Um, well, and I'll remind folks, Harvest of Memory, the title of the exhibition kind of comes from, I think, maybe an early painting or drawing that you made of this cornucopia, right? And how
yeah, yeah, it
there's
was second grade. Yeah,
yeah, and how you talked about memory as being a spiral, a sort of always circling back, and we'll definitely see that in the exhibition and today as
yeah,
specific images come back, specific themes come back, and here we're talking about early work in nature,
yeah.
split into more recent work as well. Um, This is an installation view of this first room in the exhibition. So you can see, and again, we're in the theme of nature and landscape, but Toned Totem is here next to Imaginary Prairie and the Skirted Garden. So you'll see, we'll be showing you installation views from Krannert Art Museum as we walk through. But also, I guess, we're sort of nature is where we're going, but we're also, still immersed in your time here at Illinois and kind of what your concerns were then, and how those concerns were received too,
Right.
but I think the Swamp Box, Birth of Venus, can you tell us about that? And this work, it didn't tour on the exhibition tour, but it is here at Krannert Art Museum because we came and collected it from your house. You're not too far from where we are. So
Right.
yeah, can you tell us about your furniture work when you were,
Sure,
yeah,
sure. Okay, so like reviewing this, 1969 was somewhere in my, probably the spring of my first year as a grad student. And I don't know if we mentioned this, I didn't come here for photography at all. I came to major in painting.
that's right.
And so I also obviously wasn't always painting. I was in the painting program, but doing a lot of odd things. One of my co-students had this cabinet, which is a pretty full scale, 3 shelf little rickety bookshelf that she gave to me. And I kept it around. And then I thought, I'm going to I don't need it. I'm going to build something in it. And I had been influenced by going to the Art Institute a couple of times and seeing the Joseph Cornell boxes. I've always liked his boxes. And so I thought, I'm going to put a landscape in this cabinet. So by this point in time, I was making things with fabric. I had learned to do screen printing too, photo screen printing. So those palm trees were actually screen printed on the glass of the door, on the inside of the door.
Mm.
Again, it was very hard to have transparent materials. This is pre-Xerox machine,
Mhm.
hard to believe. Okay, so you couldn't even Xerox an acetate. There was just none of that. So to get an image that you could see through was kind of a challenge. But I wanted the viewer to be able to open the door and the scenery would change. It's multi-layered. So inside the swamp box is a sort of a floating island, and there's a soft alligator in there. And then there's a second island above, which is a kind of a reference to those totems, like the totem we saw a few slides back.
Mhm.
The stacking of the landscape happens in this box as well. And then the bottom image, there's a plexiglass river that Venus, who's a self-portrait, is emerging from the swamp. And so it's called the Swamp Box, Birth of Venus, because I think of myself as a swamp Venus. I mean, I lived in the water as a kid, born out of water.
Mhm.
And so that's a self-portrait with the arms raised, the sort of vamp thing. And it appears again in this tone photograph, which was done a few years after grad school, but it's actually probably a reject print from what ended up being in the box. I never throw anything out. So that's
Oh,
that's what that is. It might have been a little light, and so I hand colored it, and it had already been cut out. And I noticed photo paper back then was paper. It wasn't resin coated paper. It was paper. And when it was dry, the air was dry, the paper would curl up. And that could be very infuriating when you're trying to dry mount it or get it to stay flat or put it in a box and not have it curl up. But I liked trying to incorporate the property of that in work. So the fact that it's sort of curving to the point where she's floating like a swan, I thought was fun.
Mhm.
And again, this is a still life done in the swamp box,
That's
shot
right.
in the swamp box. So I guess I have to take it back. That probably is the same Venus. She's just really pretty curly that particular day. But I know I had at least one more of those laying around.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
We've been a little clever in the installation of these. They're in separate rooms, but if you're paying attention, you'll notice
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
swan
Well, I
tail
wasn't even paying attention. I was thinking of something different, but then I looked a little closer and I realized that's actually pretty much a straight
was
photograph
taken from. Yeah, and you can
of
see
the
that
interior of the box.
that cloud you mentioned, the
It
cumulus.
does. I did others like this that were more like totem poles that were cut and sewn together. So I wasn't looking closely enough to see. This one's actually a flat print.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
And it has sewing around the
Yeah, it was sewn down to the board. Yeah. And board, I don't mean board, I mean museum board. Yeah.
Here's the swamp box installed
Mhm.
so folks can see, and alongside, I mean, the image of you with hands behind your head proliferates. And this
Yeah.
section of the exhibition is self-portraiture and mythology, which we'll get to eventually. But
Okay.
so how landscape and nature, all of the themes of the exhibition sort of interweave and circle back on each other, which is really
Yeah.
beautiful. Um, Okay, yeah, still in, I guess, early work and influences and things that you were thinking about. I know, even when did you first go to Penland?
I actually went as a junior in
In
college.
college.
So I was 1967, the
Okay,
summer
right.
of 1967. And it's an awe-inspiring place and it changed my life, gave me lots of opportunity. But I went for a printmaking class and learned to do lithography there that summer. And then and that's a lithograph, which I'm trying to put this all together here. This would have been done possibly a little later, but 1969, it was probably done for a litho class here at the U of I, but I took litho at Penland the first time.
Hmm.
And driving to North Carolina, not that first time because I drove from Florida the first couple of times, but once I started going from Illinois down to Penland, I was very taken with the red clay that I'd see in the minute I started hitting the North Carolina area.
Hmm.
And it's, of course, Georgia's full of red clay too. I guess soil is something that I get attracted to.
Well, you
You know,
certainly
it's
have a lot
black, it's red, it's sandy, whatever, but the red soil, the red clay soil. And this was a fairly quick sketch done, sort of what you see out the side window as you're driving.
Mhm.
My memory of the southern landscapes.
And we should
Before
say it's
Hudson.
Penland School of Craft
Yeah,
in North Carolina as
North
well.
Carolina. It is a little bit north of Asheville, North Carolina.
And that was so important to understanding your early work, was
Yeah.
how you had already been there and been teaching there by the time you were in school here. And then once you graduated here, you wound up going back and have been back, many times over.
Figured it's about 20 times.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so tell us about the image, the dress you're wearing, and interior, exterior, and then that pattern play with what's behind you there.
Okay, let me think. This is, again, these are sort of time trips.
Yeah.
It's fun for me to try to think this through. The dress would have been bought in Champaign from a thrift shop. So the self-portrait would have also been done while I was a grad student here at the U of I, wearing my latest finds in my apartment over on Church Street. I recognized the curtain. The curtain was hung sort of as a backdrop in one of the doors of my apartment. So that's just pretty much a straight self-portrait with a self-timer. The drawing above it is a lot, actually. If you look back, if you think to the very first slide we were talking about with the sort of lumpy trees and clouds. It's that same sort of motif, just a little square of landscape drawn into the top. The way this was technically done was, by this point in time, I had learned to do photo screen printing. Not a lot of it. Again, this was expensive. You had to have what was called orthofilm. If you were going to do a photo screen print, you had to make a positive on film. So, and they were very contrasty. So this is very harsh dot pattern, contrasty image of that self-portrait used to make a photo screen, which I then took to get more life out of it, and took that screen over to the litho lab here at the U of I and screen printed ink onto a litho stone. And again, nobody knew or had a way to do photo lithography either. So this was how I was trying to figure out a way I could get photographic imagery in a print. And this was one way. I never did work it out with etching. It was too toxic and too tricky. I don't think I ever did, but with litho, I could do it. So I screen printed the ink onto a litho plate or stone. I don't remember whether it was plate or stone, but I think it was stone, and proceeded to make a lithograph. And on lithography, you can combine steps, and I drew that landscape in with a sort of an oil pencil and wash and so forth. So I combined the photo imagery and the drawn imagery into one, and then printed it as a photo lithograph. I didn't make very many. I can see the edition number, 1 out of 5.
5, yeah.
You know, enough's enough.
Was it the image that you were trying to achieve that made you combine all of these processes, or was it? I imagine it's a little bit of both. Was it?
It is a little bit of both.
Just
Yeah.
an attention and immersion in the process itself, because I know you love, the making portion.
Yeah, a lot of it was. It's hard to say which came first. And I think actually when I talk with Mary in a few weeks' time, we're going to talk about constraints and economy and economics and what's available and what you have access to and what you can and can't do and what you're forbidden to do and what you're allowed to do and all of this. But I was intrigued enough. I was very deliberately trying, and this is a good segue into this slide, I was deliberately trying to find ways to print on non-traditional materials like fabric, and to do photographs in particular on cloth. And there just really wasn't any simple way to do it.
And so, yeah, photoluminos, I suppose, came along around this time, and you figured out you could paint with it. I mean, here we have 2 stellar works in the exhibition, and these are the types of works that you certainly became known for around that time, right? In the early 1970s, Beach and Constellations Dream series with the gum print there on the fabric, and then Sister in the Garden with Bird Baths, I think, is one of 4, of a kind of similar series.
Yeah, they're actually about I probably managed to do about 6 like this that were portrait. It was all portraits of women on fabric. So let's see, which one happened first? Sister in the Garden with Bird Baths most likely was the earlier piece. And let me think, this was 72. So I was in Rochester by now. I left grad school, got a job, and moved to Rochester, New York, and taught a couple of years, and then went on to Philadelphia. I mean, there's a lot of moving during that time.
And just to explain to folks who maybe haven't yet seen this in person, but Sister here is a separate photograph, right? Adhered to the background. So there's all of these layers happening within this.
Right. And also, again, like I did in the Imaginary Prairie, where I wanted a good long size piece, this is the same photograph printed twice on 2 pieces of fabric sewn down the middle, almost like it is a quilt. I mean, just 2 pieces butt it up. I'm touching as if you can see me touching. You can't. But anyway, you got to believe me.
Mhm.
It's the two pictures are sewn together to make it a little bit larger. So those were created with a process that was really tricky and pretty annoying to work with, which was to mix your own emulsion to sort of melt it down in a sense, get it warm enough so that you could paint it onto fabric, dry it, and then project onto it. So that was called Rockland print emulsion.
Right.
Okay. It was incredibly delicate. It's like trying to imagine having a layer of Jello on a piece of fabric floating in water and not have it wrap against itself and mess up. So it was real delicate, and it had to not only do the developer, but the stop bath and the fixer and the wash,
Mhm.
delicate from start to finish. The other image is my sister Connie printed on a photo paper, which was a whole lot easier, but she's encased in between two sheets of vinyl
Mm.
that I sewed on the sewing machine. So she's encapsulated in a sense. And that was for practical reasons. It's more durable. Also, what I'd already mentioned before is photo paper would have curled off the surface. So this kind of anchored it to the surface. And that's technically what's going on, but it's also a portrait of my little sister, Connie, and how proud she was of her transistor radio.
Mm.
And this was a very early photograph that I took of her when probably my first semester taking photo back at the University of Florida. She was a very willing, ready, and available model for me.
Mhm.
And I just love the intensity in her face. And that's why I picked that particular image.
That's a great image. And there's
Yeah.
so many
love
images that you use because of your family history, because you essentially became the family archivist with a sort of storehouse of family photographs that you often incorporated.
Yeah, I inherited that from my dad.
Mhm.
He loved to be photographed. He loved to photograph. We didn't own a camera, but he would borrow them and bring them home. So I had some very good negatives, 4x5 negatives that he shot of me as a little girl. And at one point, and this is right about this same time, I wrote to him, and he sent a lot of the negatives to me. And that at that point, it was sort of a changing of the guard,
Hmm.
and I became the archivist. Before that, it was him, and I got the family negatives. I sort of had a hankering to work with family memory and family snapshots right around this time, and that's when I got the negatives. But this is a contemporary image of my sister. But the image in the back is an old negative. I don't even know where that was shot. It was in my dad's collection. Um, it's got a hill, so I doubt that it's Florida. I really don't know where it came from. I just liked it. And it was a big negative too, which makes a difference when you're trying to blow something up large. So that's probably enough about the garden with bird baths, but the one beside it also is incorporating images that were made over a period of time. The um, three women in the top are me in the middle and my two sisters. I have two sisters walking on the beach. And my father would have taken that shot. So that was in those negatives, most likely, that he sent to me. So that's the beach. And then the constellations that are referred to in the title are a little harder to make out, but that's a magazine, what we used to call a magazine rubbing or a transfer, image transfer, where you would take something that was printed in ink, flip it over and put a solvent on the back.
Mhm.
And the solvent would go through the paper and start to dissolve the ink. And with enough pressure, you could push that ink off onto a surface. Rauschenberg is the guy who really sort of started all us art students out on that idea.
Mm.
And we all adapted it because it was like, wow, this is a way, again, before Xerox was readily available, transfer materials were not really readily available, that you could get imagery transferred off onto another surface. It was always backwards. So if you had something with writing, you had to be prepared for the fact that it was going to be reversed.
Mhm.
Then the image of me, which is a self-portrait, sort of jumping up from a dream,
Mhm.
is actually a shot that I made for the tarot deck that I was working on in the 70s, from 1970 to 75.
Mhm.
And this is actually an image from the tarot deck,
Did
from
you
one of the symbol
know
images.
when you're making a work like Beach and Constellations, did you know ahead of time the ultimate image that you wanted to achieve, or is it
No,
there's a certain amount of chance involved?
often there is. Here, I'm having to really stretch to remember how this one went together, but um, honestly, I can't remember
Oh, no,
whether
then
I had, yeah, whether I had contact negatives or tried. You had to, with gum print, you had to have contact negatives. You couldn't enlarge on it. It wasn't that light sensitive. So
Mhm.
these must have been ortho negatives that I had made for some purpose or another. And so you could kind of guess what you, where, because they're large negatives, where you're going to put this and where you're going to put that. But they were two different negatives
Mhm.
built up.
And I think I want to impress on people how much, experimentation and process and, is evident then in the finished image, even if an image looks finished,
Yeah.
and so refined. So, we're still, yeah, this is a great juxtaposition in the exhibition itself. Here's an installation view where
Oh, yeah.
um, Skyfish and Allerton Park from 1997 are sort of juxtaposed because I loved the spherical
Yeah.
treatment. Um, and so I think we're still in kind of early influences, but coming into where your kind of obsession, your connection to nature comes from in the work.
You want to talk about nature?
Sure,
Yeah,
or
sure.
whatever
Okay.
you like, but yeah.
Okay. Well, the Skyfish, you can see from the date, that's quite early, 1970. I'm I'm guessing that it was done the summer after I left grad school here. That's what I'm guessing, but I could possibly figure that out. And it's two photographs that have been cut. The fish are from one print, and um, the globe or the dome is from a print that I would have made as an undergrad. I never threw prints out, so I flipped it around and made a collage out of it. And I honestly can't tell from the slide whether it was machine stitched. Some of it may have been trimmed off a little bit, but I think it was probably machine stitched to hold the whole thing together.
Mm.
Um, and I did a lot talking about nature. I did a lot of my childhood time in the water.
Mm.
It was hot in Florida, and so we'd spend almost the whole summer in the water. We had a lake house, and now I look at that water and I wouldn't go in it for anything because I know there's gators there now and and snakes and all that. But as kids, we didn't care and we'd swim
Oh.
around. But we also, I did do some swimming with my eyes open in the water, underwater. And occasionally, if we had a set of goggles, we would wear them. We didn't have a lot of scuba equipment, but the water was so mild that you could open your eyes and sort of get used to it. But it was so much better if you wore a face mask. And so I was always fascinated by looking at fish. Sometimes you didn't want to know what was down there with you, frankly. It's better not to know, but still, they were in there with you, swimming around.
Mhm.
And I've often thought of how much wearing a face mask, and eventually I did do some scuba diving, is like looking in a viewfinder in a camera, because it gives you just this much view, and if you shift your perspective just a little bit, you get a completely different point of view. So I think there's a similarity between this underwater fascination I have and photographing.
Mhm.
and selecting a very specific viewpoint. So this is called Skyfish, and actually that in one of the books that I did with my mother's poetry, she has a beautiful poem about thinking about the the sky from where, if you were a fish, it would be completely opposite. You'd think that the sky was the surface of your world, and you'd be looking up into the sky. It's just the opposite for us. When we look down at the fish, there's this very thin membrane that separates the two worlds. So that's what that's about,
Mhm.
is that boundary between edges.
And photography and adjusting vision. I mean, I know it seems to also be in play in the Allerton Park work.
Mhm.
Um, Allerton featured in your graduate work when you were here. This, of course, is much later. It's a very special place, not too far from campus, where
Right.
we can hike in the woods. And so here it's three separate photos that you've sort of sewn together into a triptych.
Yes, yes. And um, yeah, I'm looking at it carefully. Certainly the first two were shot at Allerton, the stone wall out there, and then um, the circle that looks almost like you're looking through to the sky, but that's just really a circle of concrete, and that's the way it aged on the wall. It's in one of those walled sections out there at Allerton where the sculpture is. Um, and those photos could have been taken years apart. It's quite possible. And I would say that the poppies it's a little hard to make out in this image, but they're being contained by one of these tomato wires, these round wires. So there's a circle there as well. So this is reflecting different sorts of geometries. You've got the circle and the band, there's formal relationships in this picture.
Mhm.
Um, and that's basically what it's pretty much addressing.
Yeah,
That's
I
that play.
love the juxtaposition of these. Of course,
Mhm.
yeah, they've got a little bit of space here, but in the landscape.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the color is similar too. You've got that sort of bluish thing happening in both of them.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Nature. So thinking of nature, growing up, in Florida, being immersed in the water. Here's another water immersive
Yeah.
work, but you're also think of nature as uh, providing certain archetypes for
Yeah.
women.
Yeah. Definitely. This
Yeah.
takes it one step further. um, this was one of my first books. I didn't know anything about bookbinding. So I've since become a pretty good bookbinder, but I wanted to uh, create books. And this was the first year I was teaching, 1970. I was at a Catholic girls' school, girls' college, women's college in Rochester. And they had me teaching 5 course preparations. So I had very little time to work. So basically, what I would do in the evening, I had enough energy to work on collages. And so I worked pretty much I don't know, it wasn't a whole semester, but quite a long time on assembling these collages together. And at the point I was making this particular collection, I was thinking of Neptune and myself as Lake Lady. Um, and already you've seen that birth of Venus image that had already been made. So
Mhm.
I continued this myth of myself as a Venus or a woman born out of the water.
Mhm.
And here I'm Lake Lady. So the first image in the book is Neptune sort of, and this is a lake Neptune, not an ocean one, kind of coming up and turning my head and getting my attention. And a little further into the book, I've gone underwater, and chances are that could be the same image of the fish. I'm not real sure, but they keep popping up everywhere. I didn't get too many opportunities to photograph underwater. This was probably done at one of these boat rides where you have a glass bottom boat or something. I'm really not quite sure. I'd have to look it up to figure out how I made those negatives, but I did photograph the fish myself. through some kind of underwater viewing device.
Mm.
Okay, so I go down into the realm of Neptune and have this sort of relationship. And the image that's been taken out of context here are my legs sort of beginning to swim up. And I don't think we have the image here, but it probably is in the show. I think the whole sequence is laid out
That's right.
in the show. Yeah. Of me sort of drifting above the water and floating away. And
Mhm.
what was actually happening was, at that point, I was in a relationship with a guy that I referred to as my Neptune, and we broke up. And I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. But I knew it was coming intuitively, because that's what this thing is about. It's being drawn in and then emerging on my own.
Mm.
And that happens periodically in my work. This was one of the first times it really happened so powerfully. There it is. You can kind of make it out on the corner of that if you move your mouse over there. I don't think I have mouse control, do I? Yeah, I guess I do. Look at that. Okay, so these are the legs floating out of the water, across the water.
I love that this first book is in a 3-ring binder, and because
Good.
we have this great casework here, and we worked with the conservators at Eastman Museum to be sure that we could show the entire book here.
Yeah, I believe they own that book, and there's a very, this is the only one that I did of these collage series notebooks that was a really tight sequence, a tight narrative. Many of the others, instead of being sequential, were more series. It was like things that I felt belonged together, but they could be slightly interchanged. The order could have been interchanged. And there's one called Ghosts and Stitched Shadows, and there's one called Padded Parades, and another one called Bruises and Other Collections. So it was about a year that I spent making these books.
I love.
Oh, there's the fish again.
Fish. Yeah, we're really on water right now, but
yeah, we're really on it.
But here, cyanotypes, taking the blue of the water and making it sort of literal with the medium. Of course, cyanotype yields a blue image, and I just love this comparison of how you're using negatives in multiple ways.
Yeah, you guys are great. I mean, you wouldn't let me get away with anything.
Well, I'm sure there's plenty that you've gotten away with. That I bring this one up because if folks are really paying attention, they'll notice that if they round the corner or just look, I've put these two so that you can tell pretty obviously.
See, I forget this, but it was really fun. It still continues to be fun for me to see what you pick up and observe and point out to me. I'm always learning. Yeah, so let's go back to the two side by side. All right. The 72 was actually earlier. That's from a body of work that was shot with a little Instamatic camera called Events in the Water. And I think we're going to be seeing some things from that series of work. I started using an Instamatic camera, which was considered just beneath being serious. I mean, it was like absurdly lazy and ridiculous, to be using an Instamatic camera. But I was on a trip. I was teaching workshops, and the one camera that I had taken on the trip, the more serious roll film camera, jammed, and I didn't want to break it. Oh. So someone had given me this Instamatic camera as sort of a joke, and I liked it. I found that, wow, this is a lot like the camera I used as a kid. Just the aesthetic of it. It was also the surprise element was wonderful for me, because you couldn't really see what you were going to be doing until you developed the film, because the view camera or the viewfinder wasn't very accurate. So that was from one of the Instamatics, and so I had a negative of it, which was easy to make into an orthofilm negative, which is what I used in the cyanotype that you see in the other image. And there, that's a combination of many pieces of film that were laid down all at once and made into one cyanotype, one time. You can't layer cyanotype, it bleaches itself out. So it's a one-time thing.
Mhm.
And then I added some color and some paint, but all of those negatives went down in one piece out into the sunshine and brought back in, and the unexposed cyanotype was washed out.
Yeah, it's a beautiful work. I love
Thanks.
this one. Um, okay. Yeah, getting a move on, I suppose.
Yeah, we're gonna have to go along to
I
get done.
love it though, yeah. I wanted to spend a little bit of time on going a little bit deeper into self-portraiture and mythology. Triple Goddess is on view with Neptune and Lake Lady, which we just looked at. But
Okay.
when you use yourself in your work, you're both an archetype, you know, the sort of mythological creature or woman inserted into these very long histories, but of course made contemporary because this is incredibly, you know, experimental current technology that you're using. But then you're also the working artist, you're yourself. So you're both, sometimes you're a persona and sometimes you appear as B. Nettles, the artist, right? So
Right.
you'd mentioned Bruises and other collections, which
Yeah.
I love this example of the fragmented image of yourself into, this is a slide sheet and your first cat Nimbus, right?
Yeah. This was right about the time I was applying for work. And you felt like you're putting your soul in these little slide sheets, sending them out. So to put yourself into a slide sheet, I thought was kind of funny.
I mean, seeing your work like this makes me think a lot of experimental feminist photography, you know, Hannah Wilke, Eleanor Anton, where artists are depicting themselves and their bodies rubbing up against the constraints of the medium or the constraints of, you know, how culture is portraying them. And I love these as examples of that. And still from Bruises and other collections, and another great example of using an image multiple times. I don't know if folks can see very well, but that image of you in the thrifted dress against the curtain on Church Street from Champaign is in the driver's seat of Star Chevy van on the left there, and you're in your star dress there as well. So another page from this same book, Bruises and Other Collections, alongside a work that's in Credit Art Museum's collection. It's not included in the exhibition Star, My Chevy Van, which I love, ortho film, and then sewn around with those Florida palm trees, or just one tree, I guess, repeated.
That's right.
Yeah, onto the van.
Mhm.
And yeah, is there anything about, yeah, images of yourself in these works that's bringing anything up for you, or?
No, I'm concerned about time if we want to get through.
Oh, you're
I don't
good.
know how much you've got you want to
Let's,
show.
let's go to, yeah, I am not concerned about time.
Okay, good.
Um,
And I'm going to relax.
yeah.
All right.
But I wanted to ask about one of the strengths of this show too is showing a number of sort of straight photography,
Mhm.
and I wanted to ask you about the sequence and how you thought about sequencing in this series in particular, Feasts and Feats.
Sure. This was the third in, I was going to do 4 books of the 4 elements, and I did water, which we talked about already a little bit, events in the water, events in the sky. This was going to be earth, feasts, and feats of magic and anti-gravity and that sort of thing. And so in some ways it's more humorous than the first 2. So there are these odd things that happen where you're actually in the show not seeing the entire sequence, or you're not seeing them in the order that I placed them. But there are some interesting pairings, at least in this slide, and things that I was certainly intrigued by, like the landing of the jet and this crazy duck that someone had pasted to their wallpaper, or they made wallpaper by basically painting their walls with gold on a broom or something. It was really a strange house. And so this levitating or floating duck, and then that odd sculpture that looks almost like a buttonhole out there in the landscape, like the landscape's been buttoned shut. And I'm trying to remember where that is. I can't. It's either Tyler campus in Philadelphia, or it might have been, I don't think it was the Eastman House. I remember one time I photographed out the Eastman House window, and then this little Easter costume, just feats of magic, things having to do with fertility. I like the platter of the cantaloupe that looked a lot like the spinning, just the shape of that carnival ride. And then the man's ribs, he looked a lot like that turkey to me. And I can't remember if in the book they were so obviously laid out side by side, or if you saw one and then turned the page and saw the next. But things like that happen, and I'm always amazed.
This is an installation view.
Yeah.
So, and it's just a selection from Feasts and Feats, but yeah, because I guess my question with these and with, events, we'll come back to those, but events in the sky, events in the water, and here's a video of turning the pages of events in the sky, because you've made so many unique handmade books. And so how you thought about the photo book, essentially, as a set of photographic sequences versus a handmade, unique thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a subject for a whole class that I taught one time, but this is probably a precursor to what most people would see as a zine these days. This was meant to be very inexpensive and widely available. I made 100 copies of this. This was done on an offset press. The whole idea was that it could be easily disseminated. It wasn't precious. It got my idea out. Sold for $10 in those days, which was pretty cheap considering how much work went into it. And then I learned a lot by doing these $10 zine type books, which I then took to producing a whole bunch of titles, which we're not even going to anywhere near get close to talking about, which all of this stuff still, many of them are still available on my website. If you go to my store, you'll see Flamingo in the Dark and Complexities and Life's Lessons and Turning 50 and all these topics that are photographic books. They're not technically artist books in the sense they're not super fancy papers or technical forms of binding. They're the traditional codex binding of a book that you buy at Barnes and Noble or something like that. But I learned all about that, and I got to the point where I could run my own printing press, and I did. And then there was a point where I thought, well, I want to teach more bookbinding, and so I'm going to have to learn how to bind books. So I took some workshops, some 3-day workshops, then expanded and kept adding to my skills, and went back in a way, once I learned how to do it, to making one of a kind or very limited edition books that were much more precious, that were on nicer paper with leather bindings and slip cases and that sort of thing. So these are not inexpensive, although the alphabets are still quite reasonable because I made several of them. It all depends. They're limited edition though, in most cases.
But still, there were certain challenges, I suppose, to making the more widely distributed books or more mass market books because of distribution challenges or production challenges, right? Yeah, you've made a number of them and really.
Are we talking offset books now?
Yeah, offset books. Yeah. Making this comparison that you made a number of those that are really terrific, but those also had their challenges.
Oh, for sure. It's one thing making it; it's another thing selling it.
Right.
Yeah, that's the shock when you put all this work into it and you got it. it's not just going to walk out the door, and that's another whole talent or set of skill that you have to acquire. And I have a certain amount of it, but I also picked up a lot from my husband, Lionel Suntop. That was his business in the early years when I met him, was the distribution of photographic books. And so that influenced me enormously in terms of my appreciation of them and my exposure to other people making books and all of that. It was a very exciting time. Mainly in the 70s, a little bit. I kept going when I started getting some grant money up till the early 90s. And then there came a point where we're looking at it right now in this case. This is called Seasonal Turns. That's the absolute last offset printed project I did, because then you had what's called digital offset or print on demand. And you'd be nuts to make 1,000 of something if you could make 5 or 6 for no investment. And which is what I do with any kind of book idea I have at this point in time. I will make it, usually using Lulu, which is one of many places. But you can go to Lulu and you can enter my name and you can see 12 books that I've done on Lulu as well. But there I don't have a whole shelf full of them, a whole boxes of them to sell, which is a great relief.
I suppose one last question that I had, and then we'll pull up audience Q&A.
Okay.
A strength of this show for me that I guess it's carries some surprises and senses of wonder every time I walk through is how because of its thematic installation and treatment between nature and landscape, motherhood and self-portraiture and mythology, lots of things repeat, throughout the show. So that could be the series, Return Trips, for instance, Flamingo in the Dark. Many of your bodies of work are spread throughout the exhibition, but also these really great formal juxtapositions. And this is one of my favorites, with two photographs from Return Trips here on the left. Earlier sort of printed on fabric, sewn work here in the middle, and then something from Close to Home, right? Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah, this is actually from Life's Lessons.
Yeah, Life's Lessons there on the right. And so how the 3 images, here they are more close up with Return Trips, there's 3 images at the top. You've talked about this as a kind of predella.
Yeah.
And the 3 sewn together and the 3 in Life's Lessons. You've thought about juxtaposition, image juxtaposition and throughout, your entire career. And this exhibition is a great chance to really see that in play.
Yeah, the more I like the way photos play against each other and with each other. Like the central image of Lionel and the seashell is less sequential and more panoramic. It was just realistically, that was how, again, I could sort of get the panoramic point of view into one piece, because some of it was like, oh, okay, I don't have a long piece of this, but I have 3 small ones, and I don't mind sort of lining them up to create the impression of a panorama, but it's really meant to be seen as sort of one image. The one below is more of it's definitely a narrative. It's the Hansel and Gretel story of the kids getting left and tempted by the candy and the witch and the house and the woods and all of that. So that's much more narrative. The one with my son dancing at Penland is perhaps a lot less straightforward as a narrative. And that's the way these Return Trips work. Sometimes there's a bit of a narrative. Often it's in the top 3 images, but not always. And occasionally it's 1, 2, 3, this happened and then this happened. But by and large, they bounce off of each other. And I love the spiral in the first image, and then Gavin's gesture, the implication that he's sort of wound up there like that vine. And it also alludes to the landscape a lot. The return trips have a lot to do with particular places
Mhm.
and how you want to go back, but you can't quite get back to that place, but the longing for getting back. And again, my mother has a beautiful poem about special places and how there are days when you feel close, and you're really close to it, but you're not going to get there.
Mhm. Feeling a lot of that right now.
Yeah, we are.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Another great example of juxtaposition in the exhibition Across Time. I want to show folks a few more installation views and then um, get to the last poem. Is that okay with you, B?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Talk about juxtaposition. Another, the full series of Landscapes of Innocence is on view in this show. I think for the first time since you showed it in a faculty show, maybe
Right.
1985. It's really beautiful. Here it is in the middle room.
One thing I've got to compliment you on is how beautifully you integrated the books. I feel like they really are very much a part of the show, and I love that.
I do too. This
Yeah.
is one of my favorite rooms in the motherhood
Mhm.
section with books.
Which is another whole story, isn't it?
Whole story. Probably the one that's closest to my heart, and so I'm
Yeah.
asking about everything else.
You and lots of parents trying to Zoom these days. You really got it full force, I tell you.
You've also talked a lot about that work, and so
Yeah.
and also the nearly the full tarot deck, Mountain Dream Tarot, is on
Yep.
view, which we have a view of here. And so if folks have questions for B, start getting those ready and you can submit in Q&A and I'll read through them. We have until 5:30, so we've got a little
Oh,
bit.
good. Okay. Well, I'm going to entertain them and read this one bit of the COVID poem here for a minute, too.
And COVID poem.
Yeah. Not that we're all not sick of this topic, but I did this last fall, sort of late summer, September. This is the last of the graveyard books that I've done, but I thought I would write a history of COVID, and I had the months, the names of the months as people's last names. So I started in December, and it's an 8-part accordion. And I arbitrarily decided I would start in December of 2019 and stop at the end of August because I just couldn't bear it. And you can keep going and going, but I didn't want to. So that was the decision. And I read a lot of the history. I read a lot more about how things were botched and done well and who did what and all of that. And then I began to write. In the background image, those little COVID-y shapes begin to get thicker and thicker as you get towards the month of August. You'll see there's a lot more of them. But I'll just read the month of April because I think there's some sweetness there.
Mm.
And the one possible positive thing that's come of this is that I've met a lot of my neighbors. I've spent a lot of time in my front yard gardening, and more people were home with bored kids and trying to stretch the legs and so forth. And I've made some very good friends, and that's really been wonderful. So that's what this is about. April brings Corona to million world members. Worst weekly job loss. An all-cap tweet, Trump stokes right-wing tribe to battle stay-in-place laws. Red cappers swarm in town center. Venter, heckler, point fingers, bump knuckles, leveling high fives. During news brief, president favors bleach sips, hopes to treat virus with sunshine. News anchors wince. Blasé remarks stuns learned doctor, marks new low. Young flood Florida beach, surf, grill wieners, share drinks with pals. Rash parsons offer Sunday sermons. Churchgoers link arms. Sick singer lofts spittle showers over pew. Moist sprinkle harms prim widows. Elder pines to take deep nap. Constant strain mars her shallow sleep. I'm the elder, by the way. That's me. Single mamas do double duty, fitting in reading to child with screen times. Strange, you can relate to that. Strange leisure times see neighbors converse, missing normal laughter. Lively child teeters on new roller blades. Proud parent smiles, mulling over good enough days.
Good enough.
Yeah, good enough. That's what we got to do. There's a really nice blog post that the University of Illinois had of mine where I talk about finding the word good enough and in pursuit of words.
Yeah, that is a name, and also virus that you brought up
Yes,
is a name.
is incredible. Well, many of the names, and it is.
Yeah. So I'll encourage folks again to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question for me, or if there's a particular artwork you'd like to see again, we can always scroll back.
I want to extend my welcome to all of the people that registered, and I understand there are quite a few of you out there, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Yeah.
I love David Hayes's question. We were going to talk a little bit more about, we talked a little bit about place and the significance of place. And David says place is such an important subject in your work. But the places in which we live can also inspire us to work in new and specific ways. On that front, could you talk a bit more about the culture of Rochester, New York, during the years you were there, and how your experience of that place informed or inflected your work?
Interesting. Well, that's David's home turf. I'm a Florida girl, so the first time I saw snow was here in Illinois, but boy, did I see it when I got to Rochester. So if anything, that was one of my main impressions. I remember looking out my window of my house in October, and the trees were already bare in Rochester, and there was snow drifting down, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done? I think it's actually better now than it used to be, but it was really amazingly intense. So it was less the landscape that influenced me there, although it was bound to have felt that way. I did 2 bodies of work called Warm Weather Wishes while I was there, about like, I'm going to have to try to wish myself out of this environment. And where would I rather be on these gloomy days? But it was more the people in Rochester. It was an incredible time to be in Rochester at the, well, we called it the Eastman House in those days. That there were people at the Eastman House that I knew. We could just go in the door, walk upstairs to the floor where the offices were, and hang out. I mean, it's not like that at all these days, but I had, and I knew a lot of people that came through town. There was a lot of very interesting formative exhibitions that were shown there at that time, also in the 70s, people coming and going through town. So it was a wonderful place to have landed my first job.
Mm-hmm. That making of artists and intellectual community is so crucial. I've got some really great questions here. Harriet Williamson has asked more specifically about Jerry Uelsmann. Can you say more about his influence in your work?
Sure. Jerry was the only photo teacher at the University of Florida. The reason I had Robert Fichter was Uelsmann was on sabbatical. And so Robert came in, and Robert had been one of his students, and Robert had also gone to my high school. He was always a few years ahead of me. But it was wonderful, first of all, to have Robert for my first teacher, because he was very, very open to all sorts of things. And he's one of the first people who said, well, what are you doing in your painting? What are you doing in your printmaking? You know, what are you, you know, and made it evident to me that I could mix all these things up. Well, then he left, and he said, "B, are you going to take more photo?" And I said, "No, I want to take ceramics. I don't have very many electives." He said, "Well, you really should study with Mulesman. You really should do it." And I said, "Well, and it also costs a lot of money, and I live at home, and I just don't have a lot." And so he came back a day later and he said, "I've spoken to Mulesman. He needs a lab assistant, someone to keep the lab open at night and mix the chemicals, and you'll get paid." So I said, "Oh, all right, okay, I will." And so I did. I took Jerry's class, and there were we were on a trimester system, so I had him twice. I had him for intermediate, and then I guess they would call it advanced. What I think most influenced me, other than being able to share an office with Mulesman, which was a pretty big deal, were his lectures. He was a very, very entertaining speaker, and he did a wonderful photo history series of lectures, which I learned a lot from.
We have some nice photos of his in the collection, which
Yeah,
were,
I gave you two.
you gave us two, but we also had, I mean, we had maybe three from earlier purchases, and
Yeah.
there's one on view just outside your exhibition, and
Okay.
alongside other peers
Yeah.
and mentors there. B, I love this question from Tim Dean, who's English faculty here.
Okay.
He says the poems are awesome. Could you talk a little more about how you came to poetry and your mother's influence? And how do you view connections or contrasts between photographic images and poetic images?
Ooh, that's a good question. Thank you, first of all, for liking the poetry. I didn't call it poetry at first, but I've come to realize that that's definitely what it is. And my mother was a wonderful poet, and she started writing poetry in her 50s, not as a young woman. And so we collaborated, and I think they have some of those books at the Rare Book and Manuscript Library, and Ricker might have some, I'm not sure where, but you can find these books. There is also a book called Corners at my website, or at Lulu, which is her poetry and my imagery. Anyway, I always loved her poetry because it was so accessible and it made a lot of sense to me. It wasn't like mysterious. And that's what I try to do in the things that I write. I mean, it's pretty narrative, pretty straightforward. But I've always obviously been surrounded by people who love words. I'm from the South. My grandfather was a great storyteller. Yeah, good. This is good. You can see these books. And although my dad was a man of few words, he was very articulate. But my use of words really came from my mother. And more recently, reading a lot. I read a lot of novels. I didn't read as a kid. I was too busy playing in the water. But now there was a little bit more to that question about the photo.
The
Okay.
photographic image and
Okay.
the poetic image.
That's right. That's right. Well, I think if you do read more of these gravestone things, they're very visual. And that some of that can be attributed to me and my ability to find those right words, but also the things that people are named are often, the names that they get are often very visual as well. I mean, I have found the boring family and the bland family, but by and large, you find the spicy or the peppy or the whatever. They're people that are remarkable enough that it causes them to have that as a name. So there's some very visual last names out there, surnames. Birds, plants. It's fascinating, really.
But also it strikes me that the finished book is itself a photographic image and a poetic image at the same time, which is Yeah,
if you find one, it's the challenge is to make all these readable. And there are a lot of constraints. I mean, if I wanted to go into it all, it would take a while, but line length, length of the poem itself, the segments. I have constraints depending on how this thing is going to be bound. But that helps. It helps me to really narrow things down, like the line length. Sometimes I might want to put one more word in, but I wouldn't be able to fit it in. So I have to be a really good editor.
Mm, mm. Ian Wong asks, what would you say about the relationship between your art and your life? Big philosophical question.
Yeah, well,
Or, yeah.
they're pretty much the same. It's that's what I am. That's what I do. I I often, well, I used to feel like I wanted to always be in the studio, but now I do a lot more gardening, and and since I don't teach anymore, I have time to do both of those things. But they all inform each other. Teaching certainly informed my art, and my making art definitely informed my ability to teach students because I was there and I'm still learning things.
Mhm. And I love this, as a gendered question is very clear throughout your work,
Mhm.
um, parenting and work and teaching all influence the work, either coming in as content or maybe as the process of the work. The medium you decide on is what you could do in the 10 minutes between
That's
task
right.
A and task B, right?
That's right.
So they
That's
become a record of a life in a way.
right. I see it. I see it change, with conditions in my life situation too. How much I can get done.
Mhm.
Um, now I have really no excuse not to be in the studio all the time, but I'm actually not been in the studio a lot recently. I've been working on my archive and a couple of other things that seem more pressing
Mhm.
today.
There was a piece of Harriet's question I forgot to ask you, which was what's been your favorite camera?
Oh, I can't. That whatever does the job, really. I mean, I'm amazed by the cell phone. I mean, it's just like crazy easy, and the fact that you can take as many pictures as you want and color and in light situations. I mean, it's gotten so easy. At this point, I think I would be hard pressed to teach photography because I always like to sort of help people get it done, and now it's not that hard to do.
Mm. There's so much in the making and the process. I would love to still see you. Yeah, I would love to take a class with you.
Oh, well, I'd love to have you, Amy. That'd be great.
I'll be there in 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, Harriet's actually done that.
Yeah. Uh,
Some workshops. Yeah.
yeah, I loved hearing you talk about the Instamatic tonight, and how that sort of came about by chance. And
Oh,
then,
a lot of stuff came about by chance. Something would break and you'd have to figure out something else that would work or what. And often in my career, I'd be really getting good at something and then they'd take it off the market.
mm,
And we're all used to that now with our computers and our, devices. It's extremely frustrating. You just sort of get used to a software and then they yank it and they give you something else. But that happened throughout my whole career with a lot of photographic techniques. If you're relying on something that's produced and that people decide not to make it anymore, then you're out of luck.
right. And then there's instances where you use things that were maybe more commercial use, like orthofilm, and
Oh yeah.
adapted them. Yeah, adapted them.
And I was always on the lookout for stuff like that. I was fascinated by that kind of a product that would be used for one thing, and I was thinking, well, how could I use it? Like what could I actually do with this?
Did I? Okay. Well, I think I stopped sharing. I'm not sure I meant to do that, but here we are.
Okay.
It's 5:30, and I think I'll just say thank you to everyone for joining us, and thank you to B, especially. And I think, what we got at tonight is that, a kind of complete accounting isn't possible for work of this magnitude and of this, duration.
Yeah,
Um, and so, you know, we wait with bated breath for when Krannert Art Museum can reopen. And folks who are local or willing to drive here, welcome to come see the show. Please do. You got some view of that tonight. And in the meantime, I'll point you again to really great digital records of Bee's work and of the exhibition that are on our website. And the Eastman Museum has a really great exhibition walkthrough of their venue on their site. Bee, again, February 25th at 4 o'clock, she'll be in conversation with Mary Statzer, who is curator of photography and prints at the University of New Mexico's museum. So I'm really looking forward to that. And folks are just chiming in the Q&A saying how wonderful and delightful it was. I'll share this with you, Bee. So
thanks.
thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.